Second. All right, and we're back for episode 2 of the Northern Boomers. And Alex is going to kick us off with talking about some of his favorite hunting shotguns. So over to you, Alex.
Yeah, we've sort of earmarked this episode for hunting shotguns, and it's not going to be an exhaustive list by any means, but we're going to talk about the ones that we've had a bit more experience with and ones we're very fond of. And the one that comes to mind for me immediately is the Remington 1100. And
Absolutely.
we've all got a bit of experience with this, haven't we? Maybe more or less, but I've owned quite a few of them. My family's owned them. I've always grown up shooting them. I've got fond memories of them from basically birth. Jay, you've always been a Remington guy, even with the recent Remington. You gave them more chances, and I think a lot of people were willing to. And Josh, you've even owned an 1100, and now you have one that works
Yeah.
perfectly.
So I hear. I haven't tried it yet myself, but I'm told that it's been gone over and it's ready to go. So
There you go, man. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, no, it's they're a great shotgun. I have a lot of experience behind the 870 for sure. The 1100 is more new to me for ownership wise, but I've hunted alongside guys that were shooting them quite a bit. I've worked on them, I wouldn't say a fair bit, but here and there, which usually just consisted of changing out the Viton O-ring. That's usually solved all mankind's problems with that gun, from my end. But yeah, I've seen nothing but good things. It's just quintessential, like that iron and wood, and I always found it
has a
very
classic
pointable.
shotgun look for sure,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
absolutely. And well, one thing that kind of gets me about it, and one of the reasons why I kind of went to it later on in life, in pursuing like the sporting clay stuff, is that what's his name? Digweed. Apparently, one of his first guns was an 1100, and he set some records with it.
Who are you thinking of?
George, was it George Digweed?
Yeah,
Yeah, that big fella. Yeah, yeah. He's a pretty cool cat. Um, but since getting into it, I learned quite a few things about it, which is pretty interesting. And what I'm wanting to do, I mean, I shot a fair bit of clays with it, but what I'm wanting to do is do a bit of pigeon hunting with it if I could. But how about when did you first get into like an 1100? And like, what did you first use it for? And also date the gun too, because it's kind of maybe important for context. You know what era the gun's from.
yeah. I'll cover. We'll go on a journey. So
Yeah.
my experience with the 1100 started when I was probably 11 or 12. I grew up using largely Maruku shotguns, which famously are the factory in Japan that makes predominantly Browning designs and has also made their own that they sell under their own name. A lot of people will know them after Browning left Fabrique Nationale in Belgium to go to Maruku in Japan to make Browning guns, and they've been made there ever since. The collectors always value the FN Belgians more than the Maruku Japanese guns. Probably one for another day, maybe we touch on it. I think is a lot less of a gulf than people make it out to be. When you talk about good value guns in the market, a Japanese Maruku made Browning is a phenomenal gun, and certainly way better value than the Belgian ones. They're hand fitted, sure, so the romance is there of it, but you'll find, and I've owned quite a few of the Belgians, I've owned the Maruku Japanese, the hand fitting leads to inconsistencies and wood gap issues, and obviously the saltwood issue that they had at some point. They're not perfect, and handmade has been associated with perfect for too long, and I don't like the mechanical, soulless repeatability of some of the modern firearms, I'm the first to admit. But part of the case of arguing why the 1100 is such a fantastic gun is by saying that making these guns with the more modern machining techniques that you saw in the 60s, the 70s, did not make those guns soulless.
Right.
Especially that transition period of coming from predominantly hand-fitted hasn't helped that. some of the striking visual differences that, with the press checkering, that era, that's nearly unanimously really ugly. And I don't think that then helps with a typical decline in the walnut quality over time. You see things that explain why the Japanese ones are less valued, but they're fantastic. I think so. Now, I would love a lot more Marukus here in Canada where I live, but Maruku doesn't sell its own guns here. It has to be under Browning. It's a non-compete agreement. Whereas in England, where a lot of over-unders are sold, Maruku are allowed to deal themselves and sell to the public. So that's why my experience with Marukus, I'd like to buy a lot more and shoot a lot more of them here, but it's a lot harder to do so. And any that you do find are very worn, typically quite overpriced,
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fair. That's fair. No, it's interesting. One thing I kind of, well, my interest was piqued about the 1100. When searching around YouTube, you can find an old video on like the manufacturer, the design manufacturing 1100 one from when it was introduced, which I can't remember the exact year off the tip of my tongue, but what's that?
63.
63. That's interesting. So they had it's kind of neat because the 700 was 62 and 7 Rem Mag also 62 and then 63 the 1100. That's pretty cool.
Wow, what a 12 months for Remington.
Buddy, well, and this is what I mean is like if you watch this old documentary, or it's basically an advertisement for the gun, but filmed like a documentary. It's just beautiful because it harkens back to that golden age of manufacturing in the States, which I think is kind of cool. And even though it was pretty high tech for its time, that they used like early computers to help design it, and all the testing they did for it too was pretty interesting. Like from freezing it to testing like how many cycles they can get out of the action, before they encounter any problems and whatnot. It was just kind of interesting anyway, and just harkens back to something that we don't have anymore. But when I hold one in my hands, I find like, much to echo what you were saying, it's just made the old way. It's all iron and wood. There's no real plastic other than the Viton O-ring, which is still. And actually, I kind of like that. I think some people might be, or not favor that sort of gas system, that piston system, but I kind of favor it, and that's really easy to maintain, and you can keep it shooting really well. But it's definitely made the old way. Like there's a lot of moving steel, and it's just it's just good, like just good forged steel, but still light enough, pointable enough. The one thing I can't stand today is everything, like CNC machined out of aluminum. Everything's starting to look like a Turkish production gun now. So like even, you know what I mean? Like even, new Berettas, new Brownings, you name it. It's all kind of got that real. It's like too crisp CNC, and it's always aluminum receiver, and everything's kind of really thick uh, and chunky, which is not it. That doesn't lend itself, I don't know, my view for how I want a shotgun to handle. So,
Well, when we went and shot clays last year, Alex, what year was that 1100 from that you shot? Do you remember which one you had?
I think it's mid-70s. Yeah.
I mean, so me at a glance, Jay had a brand new one, right? And you had one from the mid-70s. And someone like me who wouldn't know better, I would not be able to tell a difference. I mean, just visually, I mean, that kind of goes like they haven't changed at all. But you did notice a difference when you shot it, eh?
I thought there was probably a 15-20% felt recoil change, if that. I was impressed with how similar they were, but given I've shot them all my life, I think there was a change. I'm pretty confident if you put both of them in my hands and we shot some birds, some clays, I'd be able to tell on a blind test. But I think a lot of people wouldn't if they haven't spent so long with them. And, we're probably all aware, and anyone that's listening is aware of how maligned Remington was with the venture capital that bought them out, the private equity, and how the quality dipped. And seeing Jay's gun, the new production, what year were we talking, Jay? Roughly of that one.
I think it was produced in 2020. It was either late 2023 or early 2024. And
Okay.
I'll go grab it. Hang on a second. Keep talking, Alex.
Sure. So we're talking really outside of the real problem era Remington and coming back out of the other side. But I was surprised at them being able to replicate this gun that they've always made. That shouldn't be impressive, I guess, but they're able to make it very well. And what we've often seen with guns that are now 60-year-old designs, that they were designed with enough manual labor and skilled trades making them, that if you made them today, they would not be feasible, particularly for the cost that they were introduced at. Computers were expensive, skilled wasn't, and now that's the complete opposite. So to be able to make a gun like this in the modern environment, the same way as they used to, I found pretty damn impressive.
Yeah, it's I'm pretty happy with it. Like I said, I kind of jumped on the new Remarms bandwagon, and that for me it was kind of more about what their CEO, the president CEO, I kind of followed him in a few podcasts and whatnot, and some interviews, and what he had to say, and then he had some engineers come on some podcasts and interviews with him, and I was just interested in what they had to say, because I have had like the armor side training from Remington, and um, more specific for the 870 anyway. But they kind of said a few of the magical words for me when not just that they were focused on trying to bring quality back, but the big one for me was kind of just materials and metallurgy, that they were able to uh, use some different steels that made a bit more sense now in the modern era. Not for the ease of manufacturing really, but it was actually more for the longevity of the gun, which I liked. That's something I really like to hear. But then in kind of seeing them and comparing them, like from well, what I use as a comparison, the first one I got into is an 870 Fieldmaster, and compared that to Express that I had of old. The Fieldmaster was night and day different. It was definitely a better gun. So I'm not saying it competes with a Wingmaster back in the 70s or something like that, but for what you're paying today, it's certainly a marked improvement from what they were producing pre-bankruptcy. So there's no doubt about that. From there, I got into an 870 Police Magnum, and side by side with like special purpose magnums and police magnums of old, there was you could definitely see the fit and finish quality was absolutely there without question. Um, rock solid, rock solid shotgun. So those are two Rem Arms perks, and well, and I guess to specify, you're looking at a Rem Arms gun, so a post bankruptcy gun, if the serial number starts with RA, so Romeo Alpha, and then whatever your number is. So that's a post bankruptcy gun. From there to a Model 700 and 7 Rem Mag, 700 BDL, 7 again an RA gun. So all these guns are made 2023, 2024, and then the last one was the 1100 Sporting, and it's been pretty rock solid. So never, well, it has been completely rock. Never had a problem with it. It's been working great, but the fit and finish is just. I don't know, I was pretty impressed with it. Like, I don't even know if you can kind of pick up even like some of that, and I'm pretty dang happy with. But yeah, still, I
Now,
was just happy with the
this,
product for what it was.
yeah, absolutely. But it's interesting that we're praising Remington that they've faithfully
Yeah,
replicated the gun, but they're now replicating it for a price point that is significantly higher than you can find the old original used examples for. So it's a really good conundrum of you can now source a brand new one, and we can definitely go into the reliability of the 1100 later. And I definitely think that they're more reliable than people have given them credit for, and they've got a bit of an unfair reputation. But if you assume that the old ones work well and that they're easy to work on, is there really a case for buying a new one that's more expensive, even when the new ones are a faithful reproduction?
I think that's a really good point, and I that was mentioned in one of Ken Darcy's interviews, where he said like their biggest competitor is a gun that the company produced back in the 60s and 70s. So you're not competing. They're not necessarily competing just to get a market space where, about other competitors making new guns. And then also the problem that he saw it in one of his interviews, he spoke to the fact that pre-bankruptcy, when it was owned by Freedom Group, was that they were trying to compete against the lowest level of of production gun out there, like Turkish imports and a bunch of other imports. And it's like it wasn't a space that they had any business really trying to compete or get involved in. And he says that is the hardest thing today. So the use case is, I mean, the way I looked at it, I guess what harkened to me is I like these old guns, but I want to use them. I want to shoot the crap out of them. But for me, the selling point was just that it was that faithful reproduction, and for me, it was the materials. When they started to talk steels, from the receiver to barrels to parts, um, that I was pretty happy about. Now, does that mean go out and buy a new one? No, I think it's just whatever tickles your fancy. Um, uh, I liked that. I wanted kind of to reward a manufacturer for making guns the way that I wanted them to make them, if that makes sense. Because I don't think there's enough of that. Unfortunately, it's kind of a dying thing, is the best way I can put it. So if I was going to park my money in new production guns, I wanted it to at least be something like that. Um, but yeah, so that's why I made the decision I made, and um, it's worked out pretty good so far. I can't complain. I've been pretty happy with it so far. The downside now is the what I'm now. This is me taught as a consumer, as a kind of a follow the product. What I'm kind of frustrated about is with Remington or Rem Arms now is that they've completed the transition to LaGrange, Georgia, and shut down the Ilion plant. Um, and so this is kind of bittersweet. The last reason I wanted to buy these guns was they're the last of the Ilion New York guns. So that's over. You'll never get another one unless you buy a used one. So
So now they're going to have the same equipment, but they're going to have a whole new labor force.
same equipment, whole new labor force. And the problem that I see now is that's yet to be tested, and still to this day that we record this, they're virtually silent. And the products, like even Josh, your new 270, your model 780L, which you just got not long, what would you say, mere weeks to a month ago, maybe?
Yep.
That's still an Ilion gun. That's not a LaGrange gun. So it's like, and they moved to LaGrange about a year ago now, and they've been pretty silent. So it's kind of spooky as to, well, what's actually going on. So here we are again. It's not necessarily a quality problem, but it's a communication problem. They're not really communicating to their customers. They're not at any of the gun shows. They're not. Well, that's not true. They were at TACCOM, as Josh pointed out earlier, which we should. I would like to hear what Josh has to say about what that guy had to say, that representative had to say. But they're not at too many shows. Like they're not at SHOT Show. I don't know if they were at the NRA show, but the downside to all this is that, okay, they made the move, but there's really very little communication. Unless they're stamping LaGrange guns still with an Ilion New York roll marker. I don't
Same
know.
equipment, they got the stamps.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's what's happening or not, but that was one of the other reasons why I wanted to kind of snorkel these up, is because knowing that they were moving, and I bought these all. The announcement was made, but the move didn't happen yet, and these guns were already in country. So the employees, more importantly, they weren't made by an employee knowing that the plant was being shut down. So that was kind of like a sweet spot of guns that I wanted to buy. So I bought the four of them, and I'm pretty happy with it. That was kind of the last big selling point for me. But now going forward, I don't know. It's tough to know what the future holds for the company. I hope they keep doing it the way that they've done it, uh, because I think it's sooner or later we're going to find a world where you can't go out to your big box sporting goods store and buy something like this, and I think that's unfortunate. I just that's kind of the thing is, you know, I don't begrudge anyone for what they buy. Everyone's tastes are different, but I just like stuff made the old way. So if they can keep making it the old way, I'm happy. Hence Boomer and the title of the podcast. That's what I got. Let me.
And you see the same with High Standard. The old Camden guns are considered way more valuable before they moved the factory. So there is a real risk with moving a factory, either real or perceived, that the quality will be different, that the output will be different. Maybe it would have changed had they stayed in the same factory regardless. But it's a real clear focal point for collectors to say, here is one era and here is a second.
Yeah. Well, Josh, I don't know. I'm going to put this thing back in the vault there, but you, were at TACOM last year and you met I think it was the LE rep, was it not? But it was a Rem Arms rep. It wasn't like
It was
an
quite
importer.
unfortunate too, because all of his
Yeah.
crates that he was bringing up got held up at the border.
Yeah.
So he had a table. He had to borrow guns from, gosh, was it North Silva? I forget who. He had
Yes.
to borrow, yeah, he had to borrow the guns to put on his table. So it was quite unfortunate there. But he didn't really have a lot to say. He was hopeful about the move, but he kind of said, that's why I made that point about the quality issues. He was a little bit apprehensive about having to retrain a whole workforce, right? I mean, it's kind of a daunting task that he wasn't looking forward to, but he was excited for the future. But that was his main point.
Yeah, so it's interesting to hear that, like, that's his feedback, like a guy directly from
Yeah,
the.
he's
So
there
he
to
clearly
promote
was a.
to
Yeah.
promote it, and he's kind of denigrating it at the same time.
Yeah, and so he clearly was like an Ilion plant guy at some point in time, and moved then to Lagrange,
Yeah,
Georgia, for this move, and here we are. And
yeah,
so my biggest beef right now, I mean, one, I was happy to get the last of the Lagrange, or sorry, the last of the Ilion guns. That's why I jumped onto it.
and why
Because I
you
think
fear
there was a bit of an unforeseen opportunity there in a way. Maybe, I don't know, 20, 30 years down the road, maybe that's worth something. I don't know, but to have the last of those guns, so to speak. But no one seemed to look at that. But again, the stuff that I like, the masses don't seem to like. But shit, I forgot where I was going with
it's just
this.
something to talk
Yeah,
about either way, right?
yeah. Well,
The topic
exactly, exactly. And that's just it's just well, on the other side too, the hat tip to those workers, because it's kind of in a way sucks for them. I mean, I get the economies of scale, and I get producing firearms there is tough, especially given everything probably from their electricity rate to taxes to laws that from the New York State, etc., that are really difficult. Not to mention the building's over 100 years old, and I mean, he did that. Ken Darcy does a bit of a, if you go to the YouTube channel, does a bit of a talk about the move and how difficult manufacturing was there, simply because how widespread operations were over several different buildings. And, even just to maneuver parts around is, going from one building to the next and so on and so forth. I guess it doesn't make sense for a modern, on-demand type manufacturing, or what do you call it, lean manufacturing operation. I guess it doesn't lend itself to that. So that makes sense. But you got to hat tip those alien workers, because they came back at it after all the difficulties and the tumultuous nature of that bankruptcy and whatnot, and lawsuits and everything else. And they certainly came back and hit it out of the park as far as an American made product for those few years, from what was it, 2021 or 22 to 2024. They did a damn fine job. There's no doubt about that, comparatively speaking, prior to what was produced prior. Because that was the biggest thing that hit me, was comparing the product that I owned before the bankruptcy to after are two very different products. They don't compare side by side. Um, there was, for everything from even on the Field Master, the Express, like additional machining, so machining the rear sight groove, drilling, tapping them. Everything was Vibrahome, which so all this stuff was not on the Express. So this is all stuff that would have been on, Wing Masters and 870s of old, that were not on the guns for prior to this bankruptcy for the past 20 years. But they were on these new production guns. These processes were part of the new production guns. To even like that bead blasted paint on really crappy finish uh, that would rust on the old 870s. That's gone. It's the finish is certainly a lot more. It's more akin to a parkerization than anything else. And then the police magazine was a step up from that. But so yeah,
A
I was
lot of
pretty happy with seeing that.
Yeah, a lot of horror stories from the Freedom Group era, definitely.
Terrible. Ruined the company, unfortunately. Really just ruined the company. So my hat's off to that Ken Darcy. Those are reasons why I got into it. I love the old products too. I mean, getting to shoot your gun, and it's really cool to see Josh's come around, because I know there's a little bit of but what ended up being the problem with that 1100 anyway, with
about 2
Josh's?
million round counts.
Well, I mean, she's using it, but it still runs, so you got to give it that.
It does. So that's probably a good time to touch on reliability of these things.
Yeah.
Even I was expecting to talk about it a bit later, so I'll try and gather all my thoughts. Here's my theory. The 1100, I think, has a couple of vocal people throughout its lifespan that have said it's unreliable, and it has a reputation for being. I don't think that's fair. Josh bought a trap version, and it's a lovely gun. It's definitely worth what Josh paid for it, but it's seen significantly higher round counts than you'd see otherwise. And I think that's a call out for a lot of people that are shopping for these. If you find the trap guns and they're out there, they often have nicer wood, so people are gravitated towards them. You know, they'll typically be 30-inch full choke with a Monte Carlo stock. They've seen a lot of rounds.
Yeah.
And the problem with Josh is really hard to determine because I took it to pieces, gave it a full service, put it back together, and ran it with full power ammo, 7.5s at 1,200 feet per second, rather than 1145 feet per second, or 7/8 of lead instead of an ounce of lead. You wouldn't think that would make a difference, but these shotguns were designed for a full power clay shell, and it didn't malfunction a single time after doing all those things, but it every time with the reduced recoil loads. And I think it's luck of the draw in a lot of ways, because when you buy one of these old shotguns, some of them run light recoil shells really well. And I think that needs to be considered as a bonus, but not the expectation. We have some 1100s in the family that run 24 grams, so 7/8 or even 6/8 really well, no problem. We've even had them sometimes run 21-gram shells for 12 gauge, which is really, really light. That was with a cuts compensator on the end, so I wonder if that also changes it. But if you're shooting regular ammunition and you're cleaning these things at a regular service interval, you should have very few problems. And Jay, I know you touched on with the new ones, the metallurgy's improved. I always like to see that when companies are reimagining their old guns or re-releasing them, that they change the metallurgy, because the only problems with this gun is that the metallurgy of these guns is 60, 65 years old. At some point, they will stress fracture and physically fail. But you're talking
really. You didn't actually change any parts on mine, though, did you?
I gave you a new O-ring, and that's it.
You just something was bent. What was bent?
So the stock has a tube inside the stock that screws into your receiver, and that carries your recoil spring. That was slightly bent, and so correcting that by just threading it on properly. I don't know if that made a difference, but it seemed to in how smoothly it cycled manually.
I have heard that is a common issue, that people will bend those.
Usually, it's only a common issue to the point where you can physically see it. When you hold up a shotgun and you see where the stock meets the back of the receiver, usually there'll be a tiny little gap at the top of that meeting point, whereas it'll be flush in the bottom. That's a great indication that that stock tube's been bent at some point. Usually it's still able to be fixed, but with the wood and the receiver, you might be buying something that's tricky to fix on either of those points. But they're still pretty rare. But if they have an issue, they won't work for you very well.
Now, what was the issue with Ryan's?
Ryan needed a new O-ring and a good clean. His was a 3-inch and caked in carbon. And this is another call out that the shotgun I like the best in the 1100 lineup is the 28-inch modified fixed choke. Now, that's one of the downsides of these old guns, right? They have fixed chokes. They are not really rated for steel, although we'll get into that. And they're not 3-inch unless you have an express 3-inch model. So I always advocate to people, an 1100 is a great buy if it comes with the choke that you don't mind using for the purpose, that it doesn't really shoot steel as in, it'll pattern fine and they're good. But if you want a high volume steel gun, you might want to look elsewhere, or happy that you might bulge the barrel after thousands of rounds on your 1100. And you'll need to buy the chambering of the gun that you want, because the 3 inches sometimes don't cycle the 2 3/4 shells as reliably, because they only have one tiny little gas port in the barrel, versus the 2 of the 2 3/4 chamberings.
So that brings me to a couple points I wanted to make. Was first to go back to Josh's bent recoil spring housing, I guess you can say. And just for the viewers that don't follow what we're trying to say, I'll use this as a diagram. So the recoil spring's housed in basically like an appendage that goes down into the stock, correct? And it's that housing that encapsulates that spring with a little dog from the back of the breech block or bolt, if you want to call it that, travels in and out of that. But to be a lot of people, like, just to be fair, to point out that there's a lot of modern guns that still use that design today with great reliability. Like the Benelli M4, for instance, is the exact same system, correct?
Yeah, it's gas pistons, like a dual piston that self cleans, but
But
it's
I
still
mean the recoil, the actual how, like the spring that's pushing your action back forward, it's essentially exactly the same.
yeah, that rail going into the stock is very common.
Yes, it's very, very common. So just for a viewer that might be like, oh, that, when we talk about it being bent, then I just don't want people to be wrongly adverse to the idea or to that design, because considering that it is quite common, and the only one that, I mean, to the top of my, off the top of my head, that doesn't use that, or as an example that doesn't, it would be like the Beretta 1301 or that A400 or A300 series. Not true. The A300 does use that. The A400 series shotgun doesn't use that, but for the
Was that
most
just
part, a lot of other shotguns do.
does that just bend over time from recoil, or do you think it got dropped or something like that?
It's usually out of spec. It's usually been dropped. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or got the wood wet. So the varnish is on the outside of the wood. We'll get into the varnish because it's quite a unique aspect of this gun. But the ends of the stock that aren't varnished, that you don't usually see because one side's covered by the receiver and the other side's covered by the butt plate, they're not varnished. So if you have water ingress over time in that raw grain, it can swell. I've seen that a fair bit. That's quite common. And it can swell in a weird way to push the stock off the receiver. All of these things, though, are quite rare. I've always had a theory when buying old guns that an old gun is reliable if all you have to do to get it working is clean it or change the springs. I don't think we can hold an old gun to needing a new spring after 60 years of hard use. That to me doesn't seem like the difference between a reliable gun and an unreliable gun. If you have to change a $15 recoil spring after 60 years of use on a shotgun, you don't have an unreliable shotgun. You just have a maintenance schedule.
Yeah. Which, there again, it's their biggest competition is a product that they made however many years ago.
Well,
That's
this is the ironic thing about the 1100 is that it is the most successful semi-automatic shotgun of all time. And I would wager it will be the most successful semi-automatic shotgun in history. And the reason why is because there are no guns these days that will be adopted for the 80-year lifespan into the market that this was. Look at Remington. They have, I think, their Versamax shotgun, which is the only other semi-automatic shotgun they make. The last couple of semi-automatic shotguns, they've offered each one on average to the market 10, 15 years. There will never be a gun that will have decades, half a century or more of offering to the market at a time when it was clearly the de facto choice. Now, homogenization on shotgun design has meant that most of the choices are very similar to one another. They're all a fairly good pick, and it'll dilute the pool of sales. And it means that because you have such a short amount of time to sell these things, nothing's going to ever come close to what the 1100 achieved.
Yeah. No, absolutely, without question. The one other technical point I want to kind of talk about, because I found it interesting when I learned about this, and I wonder if it doesn't harken back to what you were saying earlier when shooting your gun, the legacy model, versus the new production that I got, in terms of feeling a slight difference in felt recoil, was that, if, just to iron this out, the gun that you have that you're shooting that day, Huron, would that be a hunting or a game version, correct? Even though it's the 2 3/4 inch chamber, but it's a game gun, correct?
I'm not sure about that.
Because the reason I asked this was, in watching like the gun shop, or what's his name, Johnny Carter, and I don't know if it's a release video, if it's a members video, So they're shameless plug for go get a membership, I guess, to his channel. Was he did a review or a talk on it was the Remington 1187 Sporting, and he talked about like its lineage from the 1100, and essentially they're an identical gun. It's from my understanding, the 1187 just carries with it some modern updates, but part for part, they're basically interchangeable. Like for instance, I know that piston is a one-piece piston as opposed to the two-piece on an old manufactured 1100, but they are interchangeable. You can swap them back and forth. So that's my understanding is that part for part, they're basically interchangeable. That there's not much difference other than it just had a newer thought process behind some of the parts, but they're you could put these parts in your 1100 and update it if that's what you wanted to do, even though it's not necessary. But what he spoke to was that at some point in time in the lineage of the 1100 was that they went to a target contour barrel, specifically for target guns to, I guess people found them too fore-end heavy, or too front-end heavy, and that was to I guess bring balance back into some sort of favor. And I'm wondering if that might be because I know my gun has the target contour barrel, and you can actually see it like from the chamber and the forcing cone. You can actually see the barrel really taper in, so it's a very light barrel. There's not a whole lot of material there. I'm wondering if your gun has a heavier barrel that might be more suitable for hunting, and if that might be one of the reasons by where that felt recoil difference might be, because presumably we should be able to almost like exchange parts without too much of an issue. Do you know what I mean?
I do. Yeah, I agree with most of what you said. The one piece, two piece gas piston, they're all interchangeable. The barrels, I definitely think, are where the difference is. My first thought was as well with the forcing cones. With the barrel contour of the original 1100s, it's a bit of a murky history.
Mhm.
Not sure with the original modified barrels whether they were marketed for clays or for hunting. Feet ostensibly that would be suitable for both. I'm not sure which they did, but I know that taking a step back for a second, the reason I love these firearms above all else is the balance. If there's one thing that's truly special about them, the balance has to be felt to be believed. It's very, very good. Now, the balance on the 28-inch 60s, 70s era barrels is perfect for me
Mhm.
and for a lot of people. If that's changed subsequently with the 1187 and the re-release of the 1100, yeah, that barrel difference would make a big difference to the swing, but also the forcing cone difference for the recoil. That's sort of what I figured as well. But I don't know whether what I have in my era of guns, and we have quite a few of these, I've shot quite a few of them, I've owned them, is a game contour or not. But all I know is that the contour that they had in that era really is a sweet spot for everything. It works
Mhm.
great.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and they're just a very well designed gun. If we take a step back too, I know we've jumped straight into especially the other end and how they're doing now in today's market, but there was nothing like it on the market. Remington had 3 semi-auto shotguns from memory. One of them was a clone of the Browning Auto 5, which is another gun that I have a lot of respect for, but I don't like it quite as much as the 1100. Long recoil, John Moses Browning design famously, very reliable, but very heavy in the recoil compared to a gas piston gun that was so soft shooting. The other 2 designs they had, one of them needed to be manually adjusted for each load you shot. Again, I guess not unlike the long recoil design of the Auto 5 with the friction rings. But I'm not even talking 2 3/4 to 3-inch. This is, you have 2 3/4 shells and each one needed to be adjusted, which is really not acceptable. And the third one they did, this is shared between both of them, but the third one especially had the gas piston inside the magazine tube, and to a greater degree than the second design. I forget what they were both called. I think the Auto 5 clone was the Model 11. But between the 3 of them, you had complexity of parts, and they could break with the semi-autos. You had really limited capacity with the magazine tube, and you had heavy recoil. And the
Mhm.
1160s fixed all of those things. You all of a sudden had a natural 5-shot capacity, You had very simplistic operation that you could service yourself, highly reliable. If parts broke, you could fix them. And you also had a very soft shooting gun. And I think people who haven't shot one before or haven't had a lot of time on those and have shot predominantly pumps or over and unders may be surprised at just how light shooting they are. And most people don't care about recoil, but when you get older, or if you're injured, or you're shooting over 100 shells a day, it can make a real difference. And the three of those things combined in a very well-made, attractive, reliable package, we look back at that now as a given, but it was very impressive for the era. As you said, Remington harkened on as the first gun designed by computers. And there's still, as Jay says, some of those fantastic of the era documentaries to watch on YouTube. And if anyone's looking to watch something for 40 minutes, they're a great thing to go through and just revel in the nostalgia. But it was an impressive achievement. And it's no wonder they've made well over, I think, 6 million, because all of those things hadn't been combined effectively in a great shooter for a good price before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, it is. And you mentioned soft shooting there's no doubt about that. Even compared to other semi-autos and modern day semi-autos too, I might add. Um, my the impression I get when I shoot it, like, and compared the other semi-auto I had at the time was a 1301, and it certainly is right in the ballpark, if not softer than that, um, without doubt. Absolutely without doubt. And the other thing too is, like, even now mine's a 2 3/4 inch gun too, so it I don't know about a 3 inch version or a Magnum version. Its ability to digest very different shells, but basically anything in the 2 3/4 inch realm I fired out of it, it's been reliable, so far anyway. But mind you, I'm still within the first O-ring's life, so there's
But
maybe just as it gets older that'll change.
I think people also look at the O-ring as a point of failure or diagnose that to be a problem. And in my experience, you change the O-ring once in the lifetime of the gun while you own it. So between me and my family, we have over a dozen 1100s. We probably have. We're not massively high volume shooters, but we have shot, I don't know, over 20,000 shells between them. We've taken them to clays. We shoot a lot of wood pigeon with them in England, and that is just some of my favorite shooting. But we've never had to change an O-ring on a shotgun more than once. We take ownership of an old used 1100, we'll clean it, we'll put a new O-ring on just to be sure, and then we're not worrying about if the old one has any life left, and we've never had to change them. The exception, of course, is if you're really clumsy changing it by taking it off the tube and you've ripped or torn it, but that's user error. Other than that, they're really durable for the life of the gun, or at least the life of your ownership.
Well, I can tell you, like, I mean, I know there's no doubt people out there that feel that way, as you mentioned, that might think it was a point of failure. But again, I mean, I find a lot of, and not to offend people out there in the wild, but a lot of people in the farmers market or getting the farm that maybe don't know better is that these basic maintenance items from an armor perspective, at least in some of the training I had, and for my professional purpose, I kind of look at the O-ring as a good thing simply because it's so damn easy to deal with, and comparatively speaking, and also easy to source. It's just a typical, basically available at most hardware stores if you really go looking for it. It's quite common, comparatively speaking to other farms that similar maintenance schedules for some parts or some items that are potentially a lot harder to source. So I kind of like in certain gun designs where they lean heavy on something like that or a part like that that's easy to deal with and easy to source and easy to get. In this case, a Viton O-ring of all things. Um, uh, I don't think that's a bad thing. I never looked at it as a bad thing, and it was certainly easy. Like, and anyone who's had a problem, it's usually it's probably just need a new O-ring and that's go here. Whereas other semi-autos, with friends that I have and have hunted with, if they have a problem, it's like, well, I don't know, go order springs or like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help you much more than that, because it's like, this thing is just easy to take care of. Is the point that I kind of like to drive home. So yeah,
Definitely.
there's definitely that.
Yeah, those Viton O-rings, I think for 12 gauge, it's a Viton 21, and for the
Yeah,
20, Viton 19, which probably
yeah,
shows you times I've worked on these damn things, but
Yeah.
they're phenomenally reliable. The cleaning schedule, I wouldn't say is remarkable. I'd say it doesn't go particularly long without cleaning versus its peers. You clean it fairly semi-regularly. And, well, let me go down a rabbit hole here for a second. Remington claims, and has always claimed, that keeping the magazine tube dry is the best way to run these. And I think that's so that you don't add too much lubricant on the magazine tube and then the carbon gums it up and causes an issue. But in my experience, I hate to fly in the face of Remington here, a good clean and a high quality grease rubbed very thinly on the magazine tube is without doubt the best way to run them. Not only do they run better, but they also go longer without cleaning because it almost liquidates the carbon and keeps it moving. You do have to clean these fairly regularly, but I do think a little bit of high quality grease on the mag tube goes a long way. And that's actually how I run all of ours. And I normally follow manufacturer recommendations. I trust them. But in this case, I think they were just being a bit conservative. I think that's the best way to run them. And it does show. Like, we've noticed the difference.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. That's really interesting. I've cleaned mine a handful of times now in shooting with you guys. And I wouldn't say similarly, but what I've done when I've cleaned that tube is the same thing. Apply that thin layer of oil over it, and then I essentially wiped it with a microfiber. So I wouldn't say that I'm like, certainly I'm drying it compared to it being having like the film of oil, but it's not. I'm not drying it completely. Does that make any sense?
It does.
Um,
I think that's the
and
right way to want traces on it.
Yeah, and I guess what I was hoping for was just to kind of, and it's just an OCD thing of mine is, but it's a thing for most semi-autos out there anyway, like even the Beretta's A400, etc., is that you're going to impart wear on that magazine tube, or the outside of that magazine tube. You'll never see it until you take it apart. But my whole thing, this is getting warm down here anyway. My whole thing was that is I just kind of was hoping to stave that off for a little bit, if that makes any sense. But it is
And
what it is.
guns go for hundreds of thousands of rounds. Some
Yeah.
shoot for,
Yeah.
you're buying something that, even if there are a few documented problems out there, this is the most mass-produced semi-automatic shotgun of all time. If you
Yeah.
weigh the complaints against the amount of guns bought, it is infinitesimally small. These guns work. They shoot fantastic. They balance great. That's really one of the main takeaways. The recoil of them is very, very limited. And also, we haven't yet talked, Jay, about just how damn good they look.
Oh, they're gorgeous. It's an
They're
absolute.
of an era. That's the era. I don't know if a gun would get away with looking like it does back then, today,
Yeah.
but God, don't they look good?
Yeah, they're just absolutely gorgeous, absolutely stunning. There's no question about it. And I love the manual of arms of it too. That it's just a bit different from what's common today. It does catch me sometimes because, um, just that it's different from the European semi-auto, and that uh, you rack the action. It is going to feed a shell from the tube of the magazine, but it's also like this wonderful like kind of ballet of timing, where the shell coming out of the tube of the magazine is what actuates the unlocking of the action to go forward and to chamber. Um, and then the release for the action is on the loading port. That little the detent you have to hit. So it's different. It's just kind of, I like that. I don't know. It reminds me of like just kind of running like an old like a revolver. It's tactile. I don't know. Does that make any kind of sense? I enjoy it. I don't know what to say about it. But
Things feels like it's where it should be, right?
yeah, yeah. Well, I want to ask Josh here because he's had a couple different semi-auto shotguns in the past, and actually recent past too. And I don't know if you've had an opportunity to shoot your 1100 much lately after it's been repaired. But how do you feel about it in comparison to the other semi-autos like that you've used? As far as
Well,
like what's that?
Well, unfortunately, I haven't gotten to use it since Alex went over it. I want to get out and give that a go. We got to get out to Clay's here sometime soon, and
Yes, we
maybe
do.
bring all three. That's what we need to do. But it's so much smoother, right? And I do kind of like it on the loading port for the for the action release. You can kind of push that shell in and release the action at the same time, which is kind of neat, right? Just all the buttons are just they're just smoother. Well, mine's very broken in, so there's nothing stiff about it anymore. So maybe if I shot a new one, I'd feel differently. But no, it's the recoil is very nice. We just got rid of Amanda's Canuck, and it's like night and day difference. Like it's just, it felt like such a piece of crap in comparison, even though mine is quite worn. Just, you
Mm.
could tell the quality difference, right? Like you were talking about the metals used, like you could tell how soft the metal was on the Canuck, right? You've got the wearing on it and everything was just so different.
But having seen the Canuck there at that shotgun day we did at the club, um, it it was very reminiscent of, like you said, modern semi-auto manufacturing, where
Mhm.
everything is kind of big and beefy, aluminum receiver that's thick, and everything's very like crisply CNC milled, and it just doesn't have any, like, I don't know how to say it, like it's just, it's almost toy like in a way, or soulless in a way that, um, and I don't know, I just don't prefer it. There's just a, it's hard to put your finger on why. It's like when I look at, like, for instance, the, like, I just got into that Browning Mark II Safari, the Bar or BR Bar Mark II Safari, and then comparing it to like the Mark III, and they're wildly different rifles. But when I look at the Mark III, I just get like a sense of ick, because it's this modern, like, do you know what I mean? It's this modern aluminum receiver. Not to say that, again, but it's just when as far as my tastes are concerned, there's just a remarkable difference there of forged steel that's well machined, classic looking, light. Um, it's just the pointability, the I don't know how it just melds with your hands and your shoulder, and you can shoot it. It's much like even when I handle and shoot an old Ithaca 37 featherweight that I got. Um,
I
again,
do
all
agree.
iron steel.
I definitely agree with the balance on it for sure, because it does,
Yeah,
it's so comfortable to shoot, and it mounts nice, it points nice, it really feels like an extension of you. And
yeah, no, absolutely,
it's
absolutely.
that one in particular has some sentimentality to me too, because it got my first turkey with that. So that was the
With the
first,
1100,
yeah, the first time I ever went hunting for anything, and my first turkey, and yeah, it was no problem there.
that's awesome. That's
How about
awesome.
Josh? How was the patterning? You found that it's a full choke, isn't it? Your trap gun. It
It's
worked perfectly.
it's a full choke, and I would not be comfortable over 30 yards. But I think I got that turkey at about 20-25. So
Nice, nice. And 2 3/4 inch chambered, I
yeah,
presume from,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And
Nice.
yours is a especially pretty one, Josh. You often see the trap models having nicer wood. It's a good looking gun.
Yeah, the wood's in decent shape. There is quite a bit of wear on the receiver though, from the shells getting kicked out. But um,
Now let's see it.
the barrel's in perfect shape. There's hardly a nick on it. It's very nice. The bluing's still very nice. I don't know how well you can see in the light, but um, the chamber, you can see the kind of the wear there, right in there, just a little bit, but it's not bad.
Not bad for the gazillion rounds it's seen.
Yeah, would you say more than you've ever seen?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I probably handled
Yeah,
20 of them, owned most of those. And that's the highest round count one I've seen.
but yeah, the foreend's in really great shape. There's no real issues there. I need a new butt pad though, because that's not factory. I want to get something factory.
Well,
Yeah,
I think so, Josh. I think that's your great opportunity to get a second. This is how it starts.
Yeah,
You
right.
don't have an 1100 that does everything. Just need a second 1100. And let's go back to the balance of them, though, because there's a really good point there to expand on with the aluminium receivers, not aluminum, aluminium, that you see with a lot of those guns. And, it's not just a modern thing. The Winchester 1200, the 1400, very similar era, used aluminium as well. And first of all, I know this is petty, but cosmetically, you can't coat aluminium the same way as you can steel. So you're going to have a tonal difference between your receiver and your barrel that just really
Which I
breaks.
can't stand.
Oh, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Second
yeah.
thing is you're going to have a beefy barrel with a far thicker breech because your bolt is going to come in and index. Well, this is the Winchester now. They all work differently, but it's going to index into the barrel, and that's where it's going to lock in instead of locking in with the receiver because the receiver isn't strong enough. So you're going to throw your balance off because you're moving a lot of weight out to your lead hand. It's going to affect how it swings. It's going to affect how it looks. And it's more than just making them better, because sometimes that's not a problem, but it does have an impact on the end result.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's just another example of like, I think in some cases, especially now in this era, like if I can go back in time and be warned in the '90s when I got into all this stuff, I guess you say, like, 'cause it was when I turned 18 years old. The stuff I bought, as opposed to the stuff that I would buy, knowing what I know now, would be remarkably different. But nonetheless, in manufacturing today, I feel like a lot of this stuff is billed as, modern improvements. And I guess other than okay, the improvement being to weight, but the use of polymers and aluminum, etc. To me, it's okay. You can argue the what points you want as an improvement, but at the end of the day, the biggest thing I want to know as a consumer, is particularly with some of the training that I've had, was what's the economy of scale? Because I think a lot of these things that get built as an like build or promoted as an improvement really is a cost cutting or production cost cutting feature. It is very easy to work with aluminum versus forged steel. It's very easy to work. Like even new coatings is a big one too. Like it's funny. I just watched an episode of the Vortex podcast about coating, like finishes, gun finishes, and whatnot. And you can say all the advantages you want, but when it comes right down to it, I still believe that, and based on my private experience, that some like the best finishes are some of these old finishes, and just good old fashioned deep bluing or parkerizing, and this sprayed on stuff. I just even from the manufacturer, like
Well,
I've
like
never owned.
Amanda's old Satori is the nicest bluing I've seen.
Yeah,
It's awesome.
yeah. But the thing is, like again, like you'll be built. It'll be billed as or advertised as superior to the modern customer. But when you really boil down to it, I no doubt it's cheaper to Cerakote a gun at a factory than it is to deep blue it. Like without doubt, that's a fact. And like it's not perfect. Like
Well,
again,
and
go back.
Amanda's Canuck was Cerakoted, and it
Yeah.
was actually on the receiver starting to bubble beneath the Cerakote, and I was wondering if it was rusting from underneath.
Right. Well, and this is the thing too. Like people might say, well, that's a poor sample because well, it'd be a Canuck. So who know? Like people might argue it's as a value based farm, maybe that's more common. But I can say like I had since sold it, but I had a 1301 tactical with in the flat dark earth model. So it's Cerakoted, the receiver strip from the factory from Beretta in Italy, and that Cerakote was coming off the gun. So it's just again like and that's well, I haven't had too many guns that have been Cerakoted, so that again maybe a poor sample size, but I still go back to my age old experience. When I started hunting at 12 years old or 13 years old, and we got guns that we had both. We had a Browning BPS that was deep blued or the hunter model, and we had a BPS stalker. And I'll say it till I was blue in the face that the hunter, the blued gun, held up better in adverse weather conditions than the stalker ever did. And they were both treated basically the same. And I know this because I cleaned both of them. I was the one who responsible for all that. So I can, and I remember back then reading all the modern day magazines saying, polymer stocks are the future and it's better. Well, really what it is it's cheaper for the manufacturer. Matte bluing and whatnot is better. It doesn't scare game off and all this stuff. And it's like, man, I don't know. Like, I'd never found that in treating them both the same. I always found rust forms on that stuff faster than anything else. Then the deep blue, again, I treated them all the same. I've never had a rust issue on any blued gun that I own, and I hunt in crap weather. And again, you get right down to like, I never had a problem with reflection off of a shiny glossy firearm either. Spooky game. Hell, the deer that I shot last year, I sent you guys pictures of. I shot at 70 yards old, walking around in jeans and a flannel shirt, smoking a Marlboro. So, like it's not a. I just think a lot of the stuff that gets baked into the consumer is it's hiding that it's just the profit margin is better. And I
Yes.
and I feel you just don't see that with these guns. Do you know what I mean?
I think that perfectly encapsulates what we're all discussing. You heard this last episode. This episode we'll keep hammering it home. But yeah, why the Remington 1100 is so special, because there were no cost cutting measures. It was
Mhm.
just, you can make the best gun at the time, and we're going to do it for a price point. And that's not to say if you want a Cerakoted gun and it's done well, great, you can do it. If you want something that's a real tool and you don't want to clean it even the slightest bit, sure, there are products out there for you. But it's not like we're saying, like you say, bluing is unreliable, it's going to rust. We've owned dozens of these. We've used them in most weathers and most use cases imaginable. None of them ever have rust, and you're using the bare minimum maintenance of a oily rag when you come in from the rain. We're not, yes, academically, some of these coatings are better. Yes, they also save the manufacturer a heck of a lot of money, and that's why they're pushing them. But just because it's academically better doesn't mean it's going to be better for your use case.
Yeah.
And Josh really hit the nail on the head here. Often with these guns, and why we're such big advocates for them and why they're so compelling, is because they're coming up against new Turkish-made guns at that price point.
Yeah.
And at that level, it's a no-brainer, especially when you can't rely on the Turkish guns are a real quagmire here, and I don't want to get too into it, but not all Turkish guns are made equal. And even within the same company, they're not all made equal with a poor quality control. You can get some that are really good. They'll run for their budget. But you can also get some that are an absolute lemon. And you're not going to have, even with the best case ones, if you find a good one that you're happy with, you're not going to get the same quality as a gun like this that was made really well, as it should have been, and will continue to work after you're long dead and buried with something you just bought you from Turkey. It's not going to be good.
No, and not to disparage, like, again, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and everyone's tastes are different, everyone's budgets are different, everyone's interests are different. The thing that I guess gets me is that for a variety of reasons, the stuff I like, it just doesn't seem to be what the masses like. And I don't disparage them. I don't, you know, um, uh, and people might be shocked at also other things that I do like and whatnot as far as the shooting world goes. But nonetheless, the sad thing though on my end is that what I see is the stuff I like and the way I like it made is slowly but surely and is coming to an end. And I just am not interested in, and I'm not going to disparage the types of guns, or I'm not going to disparage but what most stuff, like what most podcasts or what most media, social media or YouTube videos or what are talking about, particularly in the Canadian market and the limitations that would maybe we have. And now that said, the stuff that I'm interested in now, after kind of getting older and growing up, isn't really restricted or hasn't been affected by the recent changes in law. But but that said, that doesn't mean that I don't care. I care very much about those changes. I think they're terrible, and they're ultimately hurting our sport. But at the end of the day, even though it's not affected, it's still being affected by the market, because it's for one reason or another. I think people are attracted to things that are, hang on a second. I don't know. It just doesn't hit my tastes, and it disappoints me. But nonetheless, I mean, people are going to enjoy what they're going to enjoy. It is. I just don't want to see these things stop being made. That's all. Excuse me.
They should still be made.
Yeah.
And they remain a great bargain for people who are willing to try these things for their use case. We're not claiming they do everything. That's maybe the only downside of these things, is that they are particularly applied for clay shooting or steel out of a modified choke or lead out of a full choke. They're not interchangeable between 2 3/4 and 3 inch very easily. They're not interchangeable with chokes unless you get one of the older barrels, sorry, one of the newer barrels, and the steel shot aspect. So they're not perfect for everybody. But if you're looking for an old gun that has a lot of history, they're very attractive. They're affordable. They're easy to find a good one of. They're not too scarce. It may not tick everybody's box, but it's going to appeal to a hell of a lot of people. And I think we can all vouch for this. The older you get, the more guns you own and sell and pass through your collection, the more you appreciate beautiful walnut, good, deep bluing, and the more you see that rarer in today's guns for a higher price point. And even when you can't make the difference as much anyway, because look at high gloss bluing. It's made using an environmentally harmful process, and it's now harder to do at any budget and get the appropriate permits. I've owned old Smith pistols and shotguns and the old guns of that era, and the Colts and the Smiths of that era have beautiful bluing. They're known for it. And once you see that, you really do look at finishes another way. That is the high watermark of pistol finishes, of shotgun finishes for the normal market. Now, like DLC, I'm really impressed with DLC, by the way, as a coating for modern firearms, heavy use. Great, there are better things out there. But for the majority of firearms, for the majority of users, high gloss bluing is beautiful, and you're only being told that you don't need it because they can't make it anymore for the same price point.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And I just, yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I couldn't agree more with that. And that's exactly what I experienced at a younger age anyway, hunting with two exact same firearms, um, um, just different model, hunter versus stalker in the VPS line, and the hunter absolutely fared better in those weather conditions. The stalker showed everything more, and without a doubt. And I wouldn't slouch to say that, like, it's not that Browning put a poor finish on the BPS stalker, especially back then. Absolutely not. But I just felt that it held moisture more, and even treated the same. It just, you'd see the rust show up. Whereas on the blue gun, you saw nothing. So go figure, you know, go figure. Oh,
Yeah.
puppy.
How's Carl doing, Josh?
He's being a little bit of annoying little brat here right now.
All this talk of shotgun shooting, maybe he's telling you need to be a gun dog. Sign me up, Josh.
Pretty much.
We haven't had him out to the range in a while.
You'll have to.
Yeah,
I
gotta
think
he's not happy they haven't brought him up to the range apparently.
Yeah.
yeah, it's a clear message if I've ever heard one.
That's funny. Well, gents, what do you think? We're an hour and 6. Anything to add?
I've got a few things. I want to cover the couple of bases I haven't talked about. I want to talk about the styling of this gun before we move on. It's a very of the era, and I really appreciate it. You've got the deep bluing that we talked about, and you've got the nice walnut, which I think makes a lot of difference. There's an anecdote that there was someone that lived outside of the Remington factory, and every night would go and get firewood from the Remington factory that they'd leave out in the courtyard for people to come collect. And they were walnut blanks that would have a slight burr or a slight flaw, and it was more cost effective to throw them out and use more than it was to fill them in and use them for the guns. So it shows you the level of walnut that people were using, and they're really pretty.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing that I think is quite cool about them is Remington at this point owned DuPont, or DuPont owned Remington. And the executives had a great idea of, we put finishes on bowling pins that are indestructible. What if we put this finish on a shotgun? So every Remington that you'll see that's original, the 1100s, has this very shiny high gloss finish, which does sound admittedly pretty gross. And it gives, that black walnut a little bit more of a yellow tinge. But they're very iconic for what they are. When you start to have one, you think, I'm going to sand it down. And you can. It's a bit tricky. You have to do it right because it's a polyurethane finish. But you can finish them down. But they look great. And it fits the gun. And the story behind it's very cool. The marketing, you'll still find it on YouTube. It's as indestructible as a bowling pin. We've made this bomb-proof. It's great contributor to how the firearm looks. Ironically, it's one thing to shop for with those guns. When they put the plastic butt plate on the end of the gun, there's water that can get underneath that butt plate and in underneath that polyurethane finish, so it can bubble at the very back of the stock where it meets the butt plate. So make sure to look at that if you're buying one. And then,
So that's the RKW finish, correct?
yes.
And if I remember correctly from that early marketing video from the 60s, they actually show butt stocks in a bowling, like they're bowling alley in their factory, and they're actually launching bowling balls at these stocks,
Yeah.
and knocking them over and whatnot. And then I think for some of the testing, they had a rack of them on the roof that they left out for 4 seasons to see how they'd hold up in the weather. It's interesting stuff, man. It's really interesting stuff. It's cool. Well, the what do you call it? The history and the lineage of DuPont. So there's that, the RKW fish, but there's also like the nylon '66 series and what that all harkens back to DuPont as well. So it's just kind of cool history too, to boot.
It is. That's a great reference with the nylon 66. Yeah, and my experience with that finish is that it has been pretty invincible. You do just have to watch the pieces of wood that they didn't finish and then water creeping in. Usually that's not a problem, but with some of the more field guns that people used, just something to check for. And then the final things
Do you ever take them apart and seal those up, or do you just leave them be?
I've never bought one that's been too bad. There's one that's got a little bit of minor warping, so if you run your finger over the edge of the stock, it's not even. But left
No,
it.
but I mean, as a preventative, if you were to find one that was in great shape, would you take the butt plate off and put some sealer in there so you wouldn't have an issue in the future?
I haven't.
Maybe some.
Good. It's probably a good idea.
I was gonna say maybe some like Renaissance wax or something like that. I've had good luck with that in that exact manner that Josh has spoken to, popping those surfaces off or the butt plate and removing the stock from the gun and just hitting those internal surfaces that usually aren't either finished or finished a lot lighter than the exterior of the stock, so to speak.
I think that would be a good idea. I wouldn't see any problem with that at all.
It doesn't seal it, but it provides like a temporary waterproofing at least for a period of time, so to speak.
Well, it's that same analog with the bluing we talked about, right? It's not going to be rust proof, but it's going to be rust proof enough that you need. So a bit of Renaissance wax would be perfect. I think the biggest mitigant you can do as well is just not get them drenched, soaking in water, sitting in a puddle, stock down. We're not talking rain. We're not talking normal use. It would have needed to have a bit of an oopsie at some point. Yeah. And Renaissance wax will give you a little bit more breathing room if that were to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And if it does happen, I mean, just do your due diligence. Just take her down to nothing and, dry it out, essentially. I've been there, done that with a Browning BPS medallion of all things. I hunted in a deluge of a downpour. Actually, it was its first time out. And same thing, got back from that hunt. I don't care what gun you had, you were definitely doing this because those guns were drenched, and took them completely apart, stocks, basically wood off the steel, and every steel part that I get apart, and dried every component by the fire. And that gun still looks exactly the same. Well, I would say exact same, but not from that instance anyway, to close to when I bought it. It looks gorgeous still. So
they're very pretty, yeah. And the last thing I would call out on the design aspect is the fleur-de-lis checkering, which now is probably quite cheesy, but because it was on a gun that's 60 years old, it fits perfectly. Yeah. Particularly during the press checkering era, that was about the time that checkering became far more expensive and a rare skill. You're not going to find guns of that price point on that era, broadly speaking, that were hand checkered to a very high standard.
So when the engraving is even on the bolt.
Yes, on the bolt, either on both sides. It's very tastefully done. It looks beautiful, especially in that high gloss finish. Yeah. So you have a glossy wood, a glossy receiver, fleur-de-lis checkering on the bolt, as you say, Josh. The package comes together very tidily, I think. And when you pair, and we're talking, we're in Canada at the moment, but the price point for a good one, if you just keep searching, is probably $500. I would spring for $600 if I find one that's really nice. For that money, there's not a lot out there.
No, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
If you want a trap gun, you buy one. If you want a 3-inch, get one. But I wouldn't buy them for that. Buy those for clays, given the amount of use they see usually. Yeah. I've also used mine with steel shot as a 28-inch modified. I'm sure the manufacturer doesn't recommend it. All those disclaimers aside. Anecdotally, the one I bought from a duck hunter. He shot thousands of shells of steel through it. I've shot quite a lot of steel through it. It works great. And at the end of the day, if you have a bulge in the barrels are 200, 250. You just swap it out.
Yeah.
Not ideal, but they work great. And I wouldn't be too careful or reticent of putting steel shot through it. As long as you're talking a modified choke and probably number 3 or number 4 at the largest, you'll probably be fine, by my experience. So it really becomes a real cool gun, like the Auto 5 in the historical significance, a really well-made gun just from the quality angle, and a really usable firearm. All to boot, it's cheap and it's very light recoiling.
And not to
Yeah.
disparage the Auto 5, but certainly a nicer shooting gun.
Yes, and I love the Auto 5s, but they are firmly, for me, the historical design and the oddity of shooting one. I know boys use the tools they're intended for. For me, though, I just appreciate how much of a novelty they are. And they feel half a century apart of
Yes.
the 1100, which they are. It is really cool to have both and see the difference. I'm going to bring you down now and show you some of mine on the wall. And I have a nice couple of Auto 5s.
You do that. I got to run because the power's come back on in our ice storm here. So I'm going to go flip off the generator because it's been running for about an hour now without needing to. So you head down and I'll be right back. How's that sound?
Sounds good to me.
All right.
And then the last thing I would say about them is that the subcalibers are a good buy, but you're going to be paying more. So I find the 20 gauge to be really everything that you want. It's even lighter. They shoot great. The balance is great. But you are going to pay more for them. And I think for people who are smaller of stature or want to have their wives, girlfriends shoot that sort of thing, or their kids, a 20 bore 1100 is remarkably versatile. You pay a bit more for them. You expect to find them for double. If a good 1112 is $500, a good 1120 is $1,000. Okay. The difficulty with the 1100s and 20 is that you got to find the right model. They did a lightweight, an LW, an LT, an LT20. You want to find one that's after the initial run. The initial run they made with 12 gauge receivers. So It made the balance and the handling kind of moot because it was a size of 12.
I didn't realize. Okay.
Yeah. And then like the LT20, I think the LW20, both of those have a 20 gauge side receiver. So they're so much better balanced. They're slighter. They shoot well. They're a real good package. I have a partner that shoots one. It's great. It's really good for that sort of purpose. So if people are looking for one, the cost is a little bit harder to stomach versus some of the more modern alternatives, given that we're approaching 1,000 Canadian, but they're very good. So I've had experiences with those. All right. So, Josh, you've seen a few of these before. I'm going to try and spin this around. Do you know how we can change cameras?
No.
All right. Maybe I'll just turn it around like this.
I think
this is the nicest one. Can you see this clearly?
Oh, yeah. That's beautiful.
So you can see really this one's nice and mint. Just what we're talking about here with the scrolling, the bluing, the beautiful wood, the checkering.
That green is awesome. Look at that.
Yeah, this is the nicest one I've seen in the 14 that are owned by my family. You can see the white spaces between the grip cap and the stock. They just look really classy.
Yeah.
Same again with the checkering on the front. Very similar lines to any other semi-auto you've seen. We're not talking about reinventing the wheel, but if you're lucky finding one this nice, they really are going to give you a heck of a lot of use and real good value. This top one's also interesting. This is one of the first 30,000 of the 1100s that Remington ever made. So this, before me, had that varnish taken off. So you can see versus that very high gloss varnish, just how pretty that walnut grain is and how dark it is. Now, that nice wood wasn't upgraded wood, but it was an early model. So you're going to find that the wood typically, as a rule, is nicer on the early ones. But that first 30,000 would put it in about the first 13 months of manufacture.
Okay.
So two very pretty ones. And then here is a contrast to what we're talking about before.
There's the Auto 5.
5, yeah. Very pretty wood in its own right. This one's made in Belgium by FN. You can see this beautiful Prince of Wales grip that I just love. It has a very nice line to it. But I don't like them for shooting as much. I just like them historically.
Right.
Very pretty guns. But given that these guns can look almost as good, if not better, what more can you ask for?
Well, like you say, it's more of a timeless design. I mean, the Auto 5 looks old.
It does, right?
It looks like a tank. Yeah.
Yeah, shooting them's weird too. Have you ever shot one?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it takes a lot getting used to the barrel moving back towards you.
If only I knew somebody.
Well, we'll take one next time. I've taken one out before for us for clay shooting. I'll do it again.
They do a side-by-side comparison.
Yeah, they probably have an unfair reputation for recoil because a lot of people might have set the friction rings wrong pre-internet. You have to set the amount of resistance that you want from the shells. So in the original foregrips, it has paper showing you the correct orientation for the load that you want.
Wow.
As soon as you get that out into the rain, you'd lose it, right? You didn't know someone who knew the correct orientation, then all of a sudden you're firing it and it's not set up correctly. But they recoil very heavily versus an 1100, even with getting them right.
Right.
I think, don't quote me on this, I'll bring it down. This one might still have the original paper detailing the gas ring orientation. I know one of my two do. The first is a Japanese, the second is a Belgian.
Oh, he's back.
There we go. Hope I didn't lose you guys for too long. It looks like it just kept recording, so that's a good thing.
Yep. Yeah,
Awesome.
We've moved on to Browning now, so.
Yeah, we haven't moved on to Browning strictly, but we've just been just shown the on video the two 1100s I have on my wall, and I'll show you, Jay, because they're great examples of them. But we were just contrasting it versus the A5. Yeah, no instructions inside it, but that's where it would be kept.
Nice.
I think on my Japanese one, that's where you find it. I think you've seen this one, Jay, but this is the prettiest one I think I have.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
That's absolutely gorgeous.
And then this is the first 30,000 ever made. And someone took the varnish off that and did a very nice job.
Just stunning. Just stunning.
And I take that for ducks. And that's one of the first 30,000 ever made, shooting steel, and it's not proved for it, or, not officially supported for it. And they shoot great. They still work great. And I think that's probably the best way for me to end my sales pitch on the 1100.
I like it, man. I absolutely like it. That's beautiful. Well, I'm looking forward to going back and watching this part that I missed. So we should get one view out of it anyway. We'll see how that works.
Yeah, I think this is getting me really in the mood now. What are we? End of March, early April. So soon we'll all be having to go and shoot some clays with these. And I'm really excited for that. I think that's also the argument, right? Do you want to shoot with something that's really nice and pointable and lightweight and affordable?
Mm-hmm.
A bit of a handicap to test yourself.
I'm looking forward to being able to go shoot clays at Hurons where we're all shooting 1100s, and we're going to be like the 1100 Mafia down there. It'd be great. And then we should do one at Oshawa because they do tournaments all the time. We should at least do one shoot there because that would just be fun. Like they're pretty big tournaments, but it looks like it'd be a blast from their setup. So
that would be good. I always try and bring some spare 1100s when we bring new guests so they can have a gun for their own to shoot. And
you get an 1100. Awesome. You get an 1100.
You get 1100. That'd be awesome.
The Oprah Winfrey of 1100s.
Yeah. No, that sounds like a plan to me, man. Don't need to ask me twice.
Mm-hmm.
Love it. I absolutely love it. Well, boys, what do you think?
That's everything I wanted to cover.
Likewise, Josh, you got anything?
I'm all good, man.
Awesome. So the next one's yours. So you gotta think of something you want to yak about for a while.
All right. I'll put my
and we'll shut up.
That's not fun. That's not fun.
That'll never happen. That can never happen. Well, that was a good one. I'll end the recording here. So hope the folks enjoy this one, and we can chat for a sec. 1 second.